Tragedy struck on October 29, 1977, leaving a lingering sadness that haunted the music industry for years to come. Just 3 days after dropping their 5th studio album, Street Survivors, Southern rock legends Lynyrd Skynyrd played a show at the Greenville Memorial Auditorium in Greenville, North Carolina. Little did they know it would be the last time the founding members of the band would perform with each other. After wrapping up the concert, the band members and crew boarded a Convair CV-240 dual-prop airplane en route to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where they were scheduled to perform their next show at Louisiana State University. 26 passengers were on the flight, but only 20 would live to see another day. Halfway through the flight, the pilots made the startling realization that the craft was insufficiently fueled for the voyage. Suddenly, the right propeller stopped functioning, and in an attempt to transfer fuel from the left engine to the right, the flight crew accidentally jettisoned the remainder of their fuel into the atmosphere. Once they realized they didn't have enough fuel to make it to their destination, they attempted to reroute to the closest airport, Macomb Pike Airport, just a couple of miles outside Macomb, Mississippi. The pilots were horrified when they figured out they lacked even the sufficient fuel to make it there. It was only moments after coming to terms with this reality that the left propeller stopped working as well. They would have to attempt an emergency landing in an open field if they wanted any chance of survival. Meanwhile, the passengers on board were completely oblivious to the dire situation they were all in. Skynyrd vocalist Ronnie Van Zant was huddled up with a pillow fast asleep in the aisle at the rear of the plane. He had spent the previous evening partying and was in desperate need of a little shut-eye. Other passengers were playing poker trying to pass the time. It seemed like your typical flight until drummer Artemis Pyle decided to pay the flight crew in the cockpit a visit. As soon as he stepped into the cabin, he was informed by a panic-stricken pilot by the name of Walter McCreary he should immediately go back to his seat and strap himself in. The gravity of the situation was now readily apparent, and the unsettling news swept across the fuselage. Most people just sat in silence, closing their eyes and clenching their fists, while others sat and quietly prayed, hoping divine intervention might save them from their plight. Gary Rossington, Skynyrd's guitarist and one of the fortunate survivors of the incident, recalls hearing what sounded like countless metal baseball bats hitting the underside of the plane as the craft glided over a patch of trees. They overshot the field and had no other chance than to crash in a wooded swamp. As they skimmed the trees for nearly 1,000 feet, the noise got louder and louder until it was absolutely deafening. Once the plane started crumbling, a piece of debris knocked Rossington unconscious. After skimming the tree line, the plane smashed into a large tree and disintegrated into several pieces, ejecting the passengers onto the forest floor. When Rossington came to several minutes later, the plane had been obliterated and the woods were on fire. The plane's door was pinned on top of him, but he was able to free himself despite being in a foggy haze. Most of the survivors had all been seated towards the rear of the plane, but no one was spared from serious injury. As soon as emergency first responders arrived on the scene, everyone was rushed to various hospitals. Those whose lives were spared that day weren't immediately made aware of the fatalities. Rossington, in fact, wouldn't learn of Van Zant's death until days later when his mother informed him of his passing. In addition to losing frontman Ronnie Van Zant, guitarist Steve Gaines, backing vocalist Cassie Gaines, and Skynyrd's road manager Dean Kilpatrick were all killed upon impact. In 2017, some of the surviving members of Lynyrd Skynyrd and the families of Van Zant and the Gaines siblings attempted to sue Cleopatra Films after the production company had made a documentary about the deadly crash. The film was titled Street Survivor, the true story of the Lynyrd Skynyrd plane crash. Artemis Pyle worked alongside Cleopatra Films during the production. Judge Robert Sweet initially upheld an injunction that blocked the release of the film, citing a verbal blood oath from the surviving members that promised not to exploit the accident. In October of 2018, an appeals court lifted the previous injunction. According to that ruling, the crash was a significant piece of history related to the band, and Pyle's first-hand experience during the tragic incident was likely one of the most important experiences of his life. They further ruled that the sworn oath the band members took was insufficient to block the release of the film. One band member in particular was particularly apprehensive about flying on board the Convair plane. Cassie Gaines was seriously afraid of flying, and if it were up to her, she would have gladly traveled in the band's cramped equipment truck instead. On the evening of their ill-fated final flight, Van Zant convinced Gaines to push aside her fears and hop on board anyway. She should have listened to her gut, but instead, she was killed instantaneously when the plane hit the tree. Skynyrd keyboardist Billy Powell gave an account of the final moments of the flight, where he noted Van Zant was violently thrown from his seat and impaled on a tree as soon as the plane's fuselage broke apart. Powell's nose was almost ripped off his face, and he suffered severe facial and leg lacerations that nearly caused him to bleed out. He was exceptionally lucky to have survived. Artemis Pyle was one of the least injured members of the band. He sustained multiple broken ribs after the crash, but still managed to leave the burning wreckage and seek help from a nearby resident. JoJo Billingsley was one of the band's 3 backup singers. At the time of the flight, she was in the care of a doctor in Senatobia, Mississippi, dealing with health issues resulting from her rampant drug and alcohol use. She had split off from the rest of the band to dry up a bit, and was planning on meeting back up with them in Little Rock, Arkansas for their October 23rd tour date. Billingsley recalls she had a dream about the crash days before it happened, and she had begged Alan Collins over the phone to cease using the Convair aircraft. Aerosmith was interested in the same plane, but turned it down, citing safety concerns. Just months before the tragic crash in the spring of '77, Aerosmith's management team had also examined the very same Convair C-240 that Skynyrd would eventually lease. They were skeptical of the aircraft's mechanical record, but the primary concern came into focus when the pilot and co-pilot were observed sipping on a bottle of Jack Daniels during the inspection. According to Aerosmith's management, both the plane and its crew were not up to their stringent standards. On October 18, 1977, after the band finished up a set in Lakeland, Florida, they flew the Convair to Greenville, South Carolina, where they would play their last show. While en route, passengers of the plane were shocked to see a 10-foot stream of fire and sparks shooting out of one of the engines of the small prop plane. Following that flight, several band and crew members told Van Zant they wouldn't continue on with the tour if the plane wasn't swapped out for another one. Van Zant, who was typically sensible, thought their concern wasn't warranted and insisted they keep using the plane. In 1987, 5 of the original members got together for a full-scale reunion tour. What was intended only to be a single farewell tour turned into a full-fledged revival. The band continued to tour despite numerous lineup changes until 2019's Last of the Street Survivors farewell tour. Despite the fact that their touring days are behind them, the band is expected to release their 15th and final record in 2021. Now we'd love to hear from you. What's your favorite Lynyrd Skynyrd song? Are you a Freebird fan or is it Sweet Home Alabama? Let us know what you think in the comments section. And before you go, make sure you give us a like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Tap the like button to turn on notifications so you can keep up with all of our videos.